Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to the INDE Summit and the Ecosystems of Commercial Space in the Indo-Pacific. My name is Simone Oliver. I'm a principal at Architectus, and I will be the moderator for today's session. In this session today, we're going to explore the ecosystems of commercial space in the Indo-Pacific. And globally, strategies from one sector of commercial space design are crossing over, as we know, to influence others. This is creating new opportunities and avenues for owners, for designers, and for the users of space. Through many of the drivers of this strategic fluidity, we're seeing that this is being borderless, that we're seeing that there are cultural inflections of particular places in the real estate, and the planning context at play can vary considerably and influence the outcomes. This session will investigate through regional examples how global currents are manifesting in the Indo-Pacific and survey the lessons that can be shared between us. So, at the end of the session and in line with achieving the formal AIA refuel points for the Australian attendees, you'll be able to identify the various shifts within commercial design and the benefit to end users and consequently the community, to gain a great understanding of different commercial models within the region and the similarities and the unique offerings, and also how culture reflects and informs in the various commercial developments throughout the region, to understand the drivers that reinforce and renounce traditional ideas of commercial hubs. So please note, you are required to attend the full summit program and an hour of each session to redeem your formal AIA refuel points. So today's session starts with a 40-minute discussion followed by 15 minutes of Q&A, so looking very much forward to your questions. If you would like to ask our panel or a particular person a question, please enter it through the Q&A field at the bottom of your screen. And now I'm going to introduce our really exciting lineup of speakers that we have today. Firstly, we have James. James Calder is a Global Director User Strategy at Irico. He was an early pioneer, as a lot of us know, in activity-based workplace design. He's a leader in workplace strategy of the digital age. This is a very big title for you, James. The workplace strategy leader of the digital age, and James works globally, has a very deep understanding of work styles, of organisational cultures, and extensive experience in project delivery, particularly around innovation. So welcome, James. As a co-founder of Roberts Day and a partner of Hatch Roberts Day, we welcome Mike Day. He has moderated design forums. He's led the firm's design teams responsible for an array of urban renewal projects and new townships throughout Australia, New Zealand, the UAE and Asia. He's highly awarded. He's based in Melbourne and he leads the practice design teams implementing new towns and urban renewal projects throughout Australia. So welcome, Mike, to the panel. Rosemary Kirkby is a principal of Rosemary Kirkby and Associates. She's known for her great leadership of large-scale businesses in business transformation, and she's also been at the helm of a number of award-winning workplace design projects. She works with CEOs and their leadership teams to shape organisations that are inclusive, profitable and self-sustaining. She's done this through executive roles with many leading Australian companies and now works within her own advisory practice. So welcome to the panel, Rosemary. Nyan Parekh from Gensler. She's the consulting and real estate services leader and principal at Gensler. She's located in Singapore. And as a global leader based out of Singapore. Nyan has had 2 decades of experience providing clients with workplace consultancy, real estate advice, design, and urban strategy services. She focuses on the firm's business in the Asia Pacific and has successfully implemented workplace transformation projects across Asia, the UK, and continental Europe. So welcome aboard, Nyan.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Tom Owens, who with Nyan is from Gensler. He is the managing director and a principal at Gensler and is located in Sydney. Obviously in fast lockdown. Tom oversees Gensler's strategic growth and operations in Australia, is integral to growing the firm's presence in the region, and under his leadership, Gensler has grown their expertise across workplace, retail, hospitality, education, mixed use segments, as well as consulting and strategy. So welcome aboard, Tom. And now to our discussion. So I thought this morning we'd firstly just go very broad and sort of take more of a global mindset for a moment. So I was just going to ask you, Nyan, really we've had some earlier conversations around how culture can influence and reflect and inform various commercial developments throughout the region. And obviously the region has gone through massive change, as has the world. And really there's been a massive impact, I suppose, in terms of how countries have handled their lockdown and returned to work in different modes. And so really interested to hear from you, Nyan, as to whether this pandemic that we've all kind of experienced has somewhat revolutionised the way of working for a number of countries in your region.
Yeah, look, for sure. I think what we're seeing is this has probably been the biggest global change management experience or experiment we could have had. We had global lockdown almost simultaneously across the world, with different countries coming into kind of lockdown phase, one after the other. And we've had a few surprises across our region in terms of expectations versus what we were really finding when we started delving deeper into what staff were telling us, for our own staff, but also looking at what kind of clients, as they did their own internal surveys, what was being unearthed through their surveys. And so where we'd expected, for example, quite different responses in terms of the appetite for a more hybrid future, given the experiment that everyone had from working from home and seeing the positives, but also the lack of kind of impact on productivity. We found, especially in countries that we were not expecting it, so Japan and India, for example, where we had a huge appetite for continuation of hybrid working, where we'd expected in multi-generational homes, hierarchical kind of structures when people are at work, to have a very different approach to what the future might be. We're seeing a huge demand for it. And so I feel like one of the things that we've learned through this experiment is every company, as it's moving into what that hybrid strategy for the future is, it really needs to listen to its own staff, and the focus of kind of, or the nuanced approach for each company is going to be different depending on what's right, both culturally from the regions that they're working in, but also from what staff are telling them across the world. And so there's been a few surprises, but there's definitely a lasting kind of element of hybrid across the world. So in surveys that we've done globally, this is one theme that has been resonating, that people do want to continue to experiment in this format of working from home and working in the office.
And do you think, in some of the countries that you're dealing with, there are not only sort of obviously, quite distinct cultural differences, but also just from a housing point of view, you do have, quite high density living and so forth. And do you think that this has had an impact in terms of the motivation potentially to come back to work after being locked down for so long, and to become part of that fabric of the community and city again? Do you think that has an impact? at all on
Um,
workers?
I think it's more on commute distances, actually. I think the high density living varies. Like in Hong Kong, we've seen very different responses than what we've seen in Tokyo, for example. Both pretty high density living, but very different kind of approach to come back to work. I think a lot of it depends on commute. And people, there's a lot of people that still don't feel completely safe commuting in kind of dense kind of tubes or buses yet. But I think also it does depend on kind of what the distance to work is. And I think that's also impacting what the longer term future appetite for hybrid is, just given the amount of time saved on travel on both sides. So I feel like the living conditions may apply to it a little bit, but it's more kind of the logistics around travel, etc., that are impacting decisions around how people are responding to come back immediately versus the more kind of long term what they'd like in the future.
So, just on cities, it'd be great to actually hear a little bit from Mike. Now, Mike, we have, many of our great cities of Australia, and I guess I'm from Sydney, so just thinking of the Sydney context, are talking about the 30-minute city. And obviously, this is something which a number of cities have been trying to implement that policy for some time now, to varying degrees of success. And so, in other words, this is a scenario where people have that kind of access to jobs, education, recreation and retail within 30 minutes from the home. Do you think the pandemic has really sort of accelerated that goal with cities, with people working from home and potentially spending more time in the suburbs? And what has that done, I suppose, to the 30-minute city ideal?
Yeah, thank you, Simone. Definitely. We do see a silver lining to the COVID cloud. There's no question about that. And just sort of touching on this notion of the 30-minute city or the 15-minute city, interestingly, Melbourne uses 20 minutes. This is one of the problems I think we've got within the planning profession, is that we need to get a unified nomenclature, unlike the legal or the medical professions, who seem to be much more precise in their terminology and their nomenclature. We really need to resolve that. But in essence, what it is, it's just daily needs within within proximity, and particularly from a sustainability point of view. I'll make reference primarily to the 20-minute neighbourhood initiative, which the Victorian government are really sort of promoting, and it's an initiative that we're really invested in because we do believe it's just got so much merit. So in essence, what the 20-minute neighbourhood's calling for is it's a 20-minute journey from home to your daily needs and then back home again. So it's actually a 10-minute walk or 800 metres, it's a uniform dimension, a universal dimension I think we've been using for over a quarter of a century to try and, return to the timeless principles, the timeless town planning principles of, compact, connected, mixed-use and walkable neighbourhoods that are facilitated by transit. And so within this document, this 20-minute neighbourhood document, they're embracing 4 of the SDGs, and it was really pleasing to hear a few of the speakers earlier in the program today just reference the United Nations Sustainability Goals, because we've got a number of clients now, particularly working at that broader scale, of saying that they're really wanting to embrace as many of these SDGs as possible. 20-minute neighbourhoods embraces 4 of them. It also is promoting mixed use and a density of 25 dwellings per hectare. I think the real essence of what's happened post-COVID is this notion of the hybrid workplace, which Naeem spoke about, and it does come back to commuting. It's just so taxing and just so debilitating, particularly when we're hearing, in the growth areas of Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, people are commuting 2 and 3 hours a day, and it's just, the family unit is breaking down. So if we can provide an environment where you've got this hybrid workplace, and, James is obviously, covering a lot of ground in that respect, and one of his former colleagues, Despina Katsakakis and Chris Lineberger, who we're keeping very close to. Chris is based in Washington, DC. They've just prepared a report titled Workplace Ecosystems of the Future. And for us, it's been a blessing because they've sort of said it's so important that we have these distributed and dispersed workplaces that are embedded within the neighbourhoods in the growth areas to save people, wasting their lives commuting. So we see it.
Yeah.
There's some real positives coming out of the back of the pandemic.
And do you see opportunity there too? I mean, in terms of networks of work and the supply of regional knowledge starting to sort of gravitate into the regions, around our great cities, and I guess an opportunity there for regional cities to kind of grow in importance, like you see in the UK and USA, in terms of places that are desirable to go to live around and to actually go there for particular types of work.
Definitely, Simone. Like, I think just the other night on the ABC, Alan Kohler was, put up a graph showing the 11,000 residents that have moved out into the country areas, the country towns and villages in the last quarter. So there's been a massive shift. The other thing that we've just been very fortunate to be able to work on is the strategic business case for the federal government, looking at the high-speed rail between Sydney and Melbourne. But fortuitously, it's more about the creation of 8 new cities, sustainable, compact and livable cities between Sydney and Melbourne, that have got all these hallmarks of the 20-minute neighbourhoods, and I think also of the elements that we're finding within the regional towns and villages. They're, as I said earlier, they're compact, connected, mixed use. That seems to be the future. So I think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity. Hopefully we'll see the federal government embrace that business case, and we'll see these new cities being developed along that rail corridor, 1 hour and 58 between Sydney and Melbourne. It'll be, I think, the catalyst to really sort of bring forward a lot of that development in our regions.
And so might just move on to James. Hopefully you can hear me okay, James. Just really, I guess, wanting to understand, in terms of what we're seeing of the city, we're starting to recognise that the city right now, for some of us, it seems almost like a landscape of a potentially defunct environment from a bygone era, particularly right now in Sydney, and we're beginning to sort of understand that travelling into the CBD to come to work as we know it in an office tower may actually be an era that is about to sort of undergo rapid and transformational change. Do you feel as though we're at an inflection point to an entirely different way of thinking about work and really thinking about workspace and how it might be utilised in the future in our cities?
Well, that's easy. The answer is yes. It's kind of frustrating when you look at, clearly we've moved from the industrial age to the information age, and an area Mike was just talking about. If you look at decentralisation programs, it's always been about taking a large government agency and moving it to a town or somewhere, which, for the last 20 years hasn't really been necessary. We could easily have created touchdown work points for a whole heap of government agencies instead of forcing everyone to relocate. So I think that touches on one thing that is kind of behind it, and we're in danger of potentially of sort of being the tail that wags the dog. It's really what's going on inside organisations that COVID has really impacted. It's kind of been protected because of this 9 to 5 model, which is kind of lasted well beyond its use by date. And the reality is we've been able to work flexibly for, at least 15 years quite easily, and it hasn't really happened. We saw bits of it and it was heading that way, but suddenly we transposed. So what I think is really going to happen, which will drive a lot of these changes, is actually the reformatting of organisations. It's almost like a hard disk that's, suddenly been thrust into a cloud computing space, and it's all fragmented. And as each month goes on and people start to realise that there's not going to be a quick go disco this morning, and they were hoping to move back in September, they pushed all of that back to Christmas because the Delta variants meant that it's still too risky. So, as slowly this starts to dawn on organisations that this isn't going away, this could well be, the future. This whole idea of having to format and reformat your organisation around this new way of working, and really when we started, say, some of the Macquarie work 15 years ago, we shifted the thinking from the various components in an organisation that provided space or technology or culture, and started to turn that the other way around from the individual point of view and the business point of view. We didn't realize at the time, but we were really creating that whole idea of the user experience and turning the whole thing on its head. And I think now we're really tasked with, well, how do we create belonging when we're now defragmented? And the old cultural rules, which were very much tied around forcing people to come in every day, have now disappeared. So, you know, I think a lot of what we have to do as an industry is understand, how do we use space? How do we use technology? How do we use culture to sort of operationalize belonging? It's now much harder than it was before to create that glue between individuals and teams.
Yeah. And do you think, you know, one of the things that I have felt, and many people I've talked to have felt about coming back into the city, is a sense of responsibility that we as workers have for the businesses that actually surround us and nurture us in the city. And I'm sort of talking about, I guess, the cafes and the places that we like to go to, you know, and our lunch breaks and all that sort of stuff that we used to do so much. And I'm wondering about, you know, the opportunity to potentially think about the workplace as being decentralized within a city context more, and actually that the idea that we could be supporting, I guess, the fabric of the city and the businesses of the city in a different kind of way, whether it means we actually start to utilize their environments more for work, or, you know, we start to think about, you know, the gym view on that at all.
Yeah, look, I think there's an expression in business which is a very good one, which is culture trumps strategy every time. And I think culture and the way we want to bring people together will trump infrastructure, whatever the government wants to do, whatever the property industry wants to do. And I think, you know, for those of us that have experienced, you know, we're in our, you know, gone through 5 waves of this thing, you know, the joy of coming together and being with your colleagues is just so wonderful. And I remember the first day when Melbourne really opened up, I spent the whole evening just walking around the city with all the life that was there. I'd missed it so much. And I, you know, got home late at night and I was just absorbing all of that. And the human spirit of all of that, I believe, will trump everything else. And we're just going to have to get used to that. And it's going to impact things like leases, you know, the way we plan space. It's going to really, I think, drive us forward into the cloud-based innovation age of space and use of space, all to the better use. I mean, there's this lovely expression about what we're doing, and good design does this, which is that it's an elegant use of resources. And I think we've had a very clunky, old-fashioned way of using resources. For example, you know, the whole idea of wellness, that will force everyone to do a 2-hour commute to come in, and we'll give them a little nap room if they're tired. Well, of course they're tired. They're exhausted before they got there. So that, you know, I think the culture of coming together will trump everything else.
And if I just swing to Rosemary for a moment, because I think in terms of, you know, behaviour, we all witnessed, I suppose, that incredible transformation that we did when we proved to ourselves that our workplace is actually capable of change overnight, or even within a week of the pandemic first erupting, and we were able to get ourselves home and get onto a new form of technology and just start working. How amazing that was. But yet now what we're seeing is that our corporate clients are telling us they're struggling to actually bring people back to work. And I guess, you know, in the past, you've described the need for organisations to give people sort of like the tools for change. And so what might those tools for change actually be today that you would recommend as a way of smoothing that transition back into a new way of working and giving us the best of everything?
Yes, well, I think we've got really a lot of work to do in this space. I think on the one hand, it's, and I don't wish to cause any offence about the suffering that COVID has caused, but it's also achieved something that those of us who have been working on these issues for 20 years and so forth frequently became quite frustrated about, the snail's pace at which change was progressing. So overnight, people were sent home, laptop under their arm, and lo and behold, they thrived. Now, so the issue will be, I think, more about, so a couple of things have come together. One is we were due generational change. And for those of us who are working with the youngest generations coming through into our workplaces, they are different. They are different. I know it's said of every generation, and it's true of every generation to a greater or lesser degree. But these ones really are different. They care very much about the state of the planet. They are technologically very literate and so on and so forth. We all know those things. So that's one of the drivers that's been working and has supported the take-up of working from home, if you like. But I think there are a number of challenges in there too. The reason I remember speaking at a conference at least 12 years ago, saying, look out the window, why is it we now have the technology for remote working that we didn't have 20 years ago? Why is it that our freeways and our streets are chock-a-block full of people at either end of the day? We don't need to be living like this. We have the technology. What I think we maybe are not recognising at the moment is just how difficult it's going to be to do this for the long term. So there's quite a lot of agreement now that hybrid working, usually what's postulated is 3 days in the office and 2 at home, and people are doing that in various ways. That is here to stay, and I think that's true. I talked to a very senior person in one of the professional services firms a couple of weeks ago, and she said, we are bleeding talent. I mean, it made my blood chill. We are bleeding talent. And so I said, well, why are they going? Do you know why they're going? Or are they going to competitors? And in some cases, yes, they were. But more interestingly, she said many of the best of those people are not going anywhere. They're going home to think about life. Now, that says to me that there are some things that are fundamentally wrong for the future about the way in which we're organising work, particularly in the big organisations. So the reason, to go back to that, why are we commuting so intensively either end of the day? I think it was because there were a set of rules and regulations inside the organisations that were hard to question. And more importantly, leadership in these issues was probably lacking. Now, I hope that something else has happened, if for no other reason than that those leaders have now experienced how flexible work can work and be so enjoyable and allow them to see more of their families. So skills, I think the skills to manage in the new environment are going to be absolutely fundamental. And of course, the other things, the only reason that, or the major reason that hybrid work will work is because there's a certain, employees themselves are autonomous and can make some choices about these things. At the moment, people have a toe in the water and they're experimenting. And I guess I couldn't stress loudly enough the need to continue the experimentation and for people to understand that, you know, it's not suddenly HR isn't going to arrive and give you the new policies and the new plans and so forth in a few days' time. We're in this together. We're going to have to experiment and we're going to have to evaluate the results of those experiments. And that's not going to be easy either, because it will feel all a bit wild. And we have enough of that at the moment in other ways. So the need to plan, and I'd say we haven't seen much of the HR team in the design of workspace yet, or as they haven't necessarily given us the benefit of all that they know and understand and can do. So I think the HR team really have to move in with the real estate team and do this together. It's not going to be enough to simply reduce the number of desks and so forth in those commercial towers in the city. It may be that we'll have to question the purpose of the workplace as well as the configuration. And that'll lead to all sorts of rich discussions that will help to take us into the 21st century workplace.
Thanks, Rosemary. I think that's a perfect segue to Tom. To maybe, obviously, as designers, we are grappling with what the hybrid workplace actually means in the future. And I guess from where we're at that, we all understand, I think, that we are still at a very much an inflection point towards what that answer might be, and that answer may never come. It may be something that is continually evolving and changing. And I personally hope that is the answer, because it keeps our lives incredibly fresh and interesting and challenging. Tom, what early workplace design changes are you seeing enable to enable people to cope with the new demands that we're seeing of hybrid work, and what might they be in terms of how they'll translate into the workplace?
Right, thanks, Simone. Well, there are a few trends that we're seeing emerge here in Australia, but also across North America, Europe, and in Asia, and they're all different. What we are also seeing is a very slow uptake in making big changes to the workplace, especially here in Australia. I think that it's slow going, but things are going to gradually pick up. We do know that. We're seeing a lot of wait and see behavior to see what else others are doing, and maybe they can take those learnings and maybe apply them to their own workplace. And that's why I think we're seeing some of these projects being pushed out, for instance. What we are seeing in the US, for instance, is a huge surge in workplace strategies. And so our teams are very, very busy. And with NIAN in Asia, we're seeing lots of work being done there. They are going out and trying some new things, testing it themselves. And again, I think the reason why this is really important to mention is that each company really does need to go on this journey themselves. There are no silver bullets. Everyone's going to have to make these decisions that are based on their own business and their own people. And they're going to have to apply their learnings and their conversations to their workplace. So we've seen some trends, and some of them are regarding, let's say, the more collaborative spaces. And some companies are saying, well, if we're going to provide space, new space, maybe it should only be collaborative and social spaces. And while that's important and a very good reason to bring your people back into the workplace, and a real driver for that, to rebuild culture and for people to socialize and get together, the alone sort of individual focused work is still very important and cannot always be done at home. Everyone's home is different. Quality of light, sound, acoustics, and just privacy in general can make that nearly impossible for some people. So I think you're still seeing a variety of space in the workplace. It just might be a different ratio now. It might be more of that space and less workstations. We are seeing a trend of less workstations. There are still workstations, mind you. They're very important to doing some of that work, but the ratios are changing. And again, that's between one company or another. So we are seeing those ratios change. We are seeing some companies taking less space and allowing their folks to have a more flexible working style. Some of our research has shown us recently that 90% of Australian workers that do work in currently or have been working in a workplace do want to come back to the workplace at least 2 days a week. So it's here to stay. But there is a level of flexibility that must be given back to the staff. And again, as Rosemary said, we don't know what those ratios are just yet, and what the appetite is. But each business will have to make that decision on their own.
And do you think that you have the answers to the nirvana of how do we conduct a Teams meeting in the workplace with the acoustic question is the big one. It seems to be the big one of of all the hypotheses out there. It kind of comes back to quite basic things that people are concerned about.
It is. And like,
is there an answer, Tom?
Well, I don't think there is. I have to be honest with you. I mean, even on this call, there's some cutting in and out. Like we can't predict how the internet is going to allow us to do these seamlessly. But what we have seen emerge, and which is a beautiful thing, is change in the way that technology has adapted to the way that we're working. So the technology was there. We've started using it in a much bigger way. And now what we're seeing is that technology responding to how we're using it. And the more that changes and adapts to us, the better, because this allows us to collaborate more. We're collaborating more on these online platforms that help us with all of our strategic work, which is very different from a Teams meeting. And so we're seeing that as a very positive step forward, and it is definitely helping us facilitate a lot of these discussions remotely, instead of having to be in the room. Now, having said that, what we are seeing more, and we have seen over the last 6 months when we did return to the office, is all of these hybrid meetings and the challenges that technology presented to us. And so really working through the technology and pushing them to advance some of these things further will only help our hybrid way of collaborating with each other, because I don't think in the near future we're going to have everyone back in the room at the same time to have these meetings. So it's just a fact that we need to address.
Thanks, Tom. And getting back to the beginning, getting back to Nyan for a moment. Would you have anything to add to that from a regional perspective, where we're quite interested in answering that question around what are the different models for commercial design within the region, and do you see sort of similarities to what some of the issues are that we've talked about today in the region, or any kind of unique sort of differences, especially around this notion of hybrid work and how it might sort of play out within an office environment?
Yeah, I think, like Tom said, while each company is kind of watching what's happening in the market and then trying to decide for itself what version of the future most resonates with the culture that they want to create, we can see already that not all our banking clients, for example, are taking the same direction forward. Not all our tech clients are taking the same direction forward, whether it's a global kind of strategy or whether it's nuanced by region. But having said that, there's probably 5 kind of overall directions that for the future that resonate for most clients that we're working with. So firstly, just the kind of looking at the portfolio as a whole. And I remember we started working with a global bank just about 3 months into the pandemic, just thinking through what the future might be. And one of the first things they started saying is we've gone from 700 office locations to 70,000, because the portfolio strategy now had to start thinking of their people's homes as another workplace. And so thinking of the portfolio strategy as what they had in terms of hub offices, and then people's homes, and then also near home solutions. So a lot of them have started thinking through service providers that can offer serviced offices that are closer to people's homes as kind of drop-ins. And for banks, often that might be even looking at their retail space slightly differently, so that it creates kind of double performance on the retail side, but also potentially on the workspace side as drop-in centers. So I think portfolio strategy overall is something that most of our clients are rethinking, just given that home has become part of that conversation. The second thing I would say is there's definitely a much more or faster kind of acceleration in terms of the drive to integrate technology with their property. And this is just creating better experience for staff when they do come into the office, but also much better data for property teams to respond to in decision making, especially as they pilot and experiment with what's happening as people start coming back. So things like room booking systems, security systems, even ordering food, for example, thinking about all of that being almost kind of integrated into maybe the mobile phone as the digital concierge to then navigate the new office. Is something that they're starting to think through, and we're seeing this resonate with a lot of clients across whatever regions we're working in. And probably a lot of the technology teams had to kind of shift overnight to be ready for work from home for kind of a global staff. And so now that that conversation's already been so accelerated, they're starting to see how far they can push it. The third trend, I think Tom spoke about this a little bit, is just this idea that although there might be less square meter per person, there's definitely big conversations about how that space that people do come back to is curated for collaboration, and purposefully kind of designed so that teams that might be using the same space at different moments in time can still feel like it's theirs. So that's a really interesting space in terms of designing of the space that they do come back to for the hub spaces. That will also become kind of their brand profiles to market. So even though the space is reduced, it's probably going to be much, much more enhanced. The fourth thing I would say is that and this is the big one that a lot of clients are grappling with, is what's the cadence of comeback in the hybrid workspace? How do teams if you're planning for, say, teams to use the space 2 or 3 days a week, how do you make sure that the right people are in the space at the right time so you got overlaps and sub teams don't start working in silos? And we feel like that's a really interesting kind of new way of thinking about how to use the office. And we're looking at kind of education models, but also how transport models are used to have kind of people flow planned in the most effective way, not the most efficient, but the most effective for business.
Yes.
And then I suppose the last thing, or the fifth kind of thing that we're seeing overall, is that it's not a one size fits all. And so there is cultural nuance that plays up. So especially when clients are thinking through global strategies, that's something that we have to reevaluate very carefully, because kind of assumptions we'd had previously are being shattered in some of the locations. And so thinking through that really carefully in terms of what is that nuance across the regions is something that we feel all the clients we're working with currently at the global scale are thinking through in a different way from the way they'd previously thought of that. And of course, that has implications on the CBD. And like Mike was saying, just what then becomes the purpose of the CBD if we're going to have this blended model between 15-minute neighborhoods. What happens to the CBD? So that's, I guess, the bigger question on top of all of this.
Thanks, Diane. I'm just conscious now of time, and we would welcome your questions from the audience. I will keep talking, and I will try to take your questions as they flow in. We do have one here, which is I think it's a thing in the back of the minds of individuals around this idea of whether the home is a workplace, or indeed it should be kept as a place for the family. And I suppose what we're also seeing too is a proliferation, I guess, of large-scale houses being built, and the response, I suppose, to the pandemic has been around how do we get sort of better home offices and so forth happening at home. And so, I think, Mike, it'd be great to hear back from you again around really this idea of density and, this sort of trend towards bigger homes. What might that mean to the city, and the question of balance, I suppose, between what we consider to be home and work?
Exactly, Simone, and it's a real concern to us as well, is that there might be a knee-jerk reaction just to increase household size. Now, we've seen household size double over the last 20 or 30 years from an average of 150 to 300 square metres, primarily because we've internalised most of the functions that used to happen at the level of the neighbourhood. So we put the home theatre, we put the coffee machine, we put the pool room. In the past they used to be down at the neighbourhood level. So we're really concerned about the building industry and the land development industry sort of just reverting to larger homes. We think there's models that should be explored. The courtyard house, the old townhouse, that actually fronts the street, and we put the small street at the back. We need to move away from the notion of a rear lane. It needs to be accorded, status. And this wonderful report just in the last few weeks in the Wall Street Journal, the competition that California ran, to actually look at these accessory dwellings, the old Fonzie flat, like above the garage. So if people are at home, then they should be able to, use the space above the garage off a rear lane or a small street that could be used as a studio or a workplace. So it's the notion of work at home or close to home, be able to walk or cycle, particularly with these electric bikes. And the whole micro-mobility that we're seeing occur across the globe. I think Deloitte have just established that there's been 1 million e-bikes sold in Germany in 2018, another 1 million in the first half of last year. So, there are ways and means for us to sort of accommodate, we think, workplace within the neighbourhood unit and within the house or within the dwelling itself, but not necessarily right on top of the family.
And do you think there that we are to prepare ourselves potentially for a change in the makeup of our neighbourhood? Like, I'm kind of thinking, will we suddenly sort of see an Officeworks on every corner? Will we the notion of co-working hubs actually shifting into the suburbs? Is that something that we should expect in the future? Is it something that's just maybe a trend right now, or is it becoming more of a reality that we will try to sort of spend more time working in our suburbs and therefore demand a greater amenity around supporting that?
That is our expectation. And when you think about, some of the seminal texts that have been written about, Putnam's work about bowling alone, and then Ray Oldenburg's book, the Third Place, that people need outside of home and work. They need that gathering place. And so we're really convinced that this could be the opportunity. We should be grasping it and really sort of creating these hybrid workspaces within the local community. Probably won't be on every corner, but at least in the community hub where people, we're losing places of congregation as well. And I think there's a handy coincidence that, we're able to sort of cater for people in that local workspace. But going back to Nayan's point, that, we're working with some of the local authorities in the growth areas around Melbourne in particular, and we're seeing increases in domestic violence because people are commuting these long distances. The family unit's starting to break down. If we can create these places where people can live, work, learn and play, then we think we're going to be much better off.
And just a question here we've had, which might be a good one for you, James, which is really around sort of, the question of pop-up shared office space in suburbia being close to residential areas of the future. What do you think about this in terms of, that sort of, that, I guess it goes back to that decentralisation of the city, but the feel in the future, I suppose, of what it might be like to sort of really have that our suburbs become more integrated with work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's another one of those areas where, it's been happening, but no one's really noticed. There's actually, over the last decade, there's been quite a lot of co-working that's popped up in all sorts of places, and, even large co-working, in retail centres. And, right in the middle of the first wave in Melbourne, we were actually still, building timber offices above co-parks. Whilst the middle of no one going into the workplace, we were actually doing projects to create workspaces above shopping centres. So this whole idea of the 15, 20-minute city will see a dramatic increase or a total change of what a shopping centre looks like. They've got great transport networks, they've got lots of parking, they've got lots of land, and we're going to see those sort of centres really change. But the flip side too is that we're going to see changes in the way organisations are prepared to lease and own space. So we're going to see, I think, a much greater increase of flexible hospitality type space that people can book and use when they need it, as opposed to having sitting there empty. So I think there's going to be a real change for landlords and developers, as potentially tenants that might have leased 100% of their space on the 10-year lease might only want to lease 20% of it. and then the rest of it might be distributed. I still think the CBDs, because of transport and the buzz and energy they create, are going to be critical to all of this. It's nowhere near the death of the city, but we're going to see a whole new offer from the providers of space that is much more about shared communal space that becomes your own when you need it, rather than just sitting there empty.
And do you think that, I guess it might be a question for Rosemary, this one, which is really around balance, and in terms of, we talk a lot about work-life balance in the workplace, and organisations are trying to sort of provide that sense of balance. I mean, if work becomes everywhere, and work becomes our suburbs, our homes, our office, how do we sort of create that space for balance? And should there, be a sense of regulation, I suppose, within offices to say, look, do come in, move away from home, come in, spend a few days here, or not? Or is it about just letting people gravitate to what suits them best?
Well, I think there are a number of different approaches to this. I think just to go back to the last conversation briefly, I think this issue of, what is the future of the city is really a very interesting one. No doubt cities like London and New York and so forth will manage to reinvent themselves quite well, and won't suffer necessarily the same issues smaller cities will. But one of the things that seems to me to be an opportunity is bring back the arts. I don't know how many people have had their tickets sort of torn up in the last 12 months. I don't know what's happened to all those people, but I don't see them around, and I guess they're no longer rehearsing for times that are unlikely to happen. So I think taking the arts back into, and I think of them being pushed out of some of the major cities in the world, particularly places like New York and so forth, it may have enriched the environments in which they found themselves, but the city itself somehow became bereft. So I think that might be one potential answer to that situation. In terms of the home, I think there are two things that are really important here. One is how you capture the voice of all of your people, and you now have 4 generations in the workplace, all quite different, but needing to collaborate and work together. So how do you capture that voice? And it's not just about the property stuff. If you look at the workplace projects as they come up, which they will now, as being the opportunity to be the tool in itself for change, then you really do, you have an extraordinary opportunity to harness the voice of all of your people. And, one of the advantages of this is that in the process you invent new processes for design and so forth. If we continue to, in the HR area and the real estate area, if we continue to use old processes more suited to the 20th century, we'll continue to get answers that also, and solutions that are also more suited to the 20th century. So this is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. So then coming back to the home and so forth, I think it'll only work if people have the autonomy to make some choices. Now, that's a really difficult place to go to, particularly because of the way in which teams naturally work. So I think this issue of team-based planning is pretty fundamental.
Yes.
And it's going to be piece by piece by piece. And I don't think it hurts. Change happens slowly in many respects. We've already jumped the hurdle of acceptance of a hybrid way of working. No, it would be a pity if we actually rushed the discussion. So I think that's really important. And I'd just like to raise an issue that is pretty dear to my heart, given that I set up the first childcare project in a corporate in Australia. The issue for women is not necessarily good news. Whether you're getting it anecdotally or whether it's coming through surveys and so forth. That's that women are doing the bulk of the homeschooling and so forth. That's going to go on for a long time.
Yes.
And for many of them, the way of their response to this is to say, wow, for the next couple of years, I better put my career on the back burner or, so forth. So I think we're in danger of going back 20 years in this space. So I think that one's really important. And, when I hear that a couple I know, she has 2 very small children living at Paddington Terrace, as they start work each morning, her husband departs for his mother's house, where there are no children. So they're very real issues that are starting to come up in that space.
Thanks, Rosemary. We are getting down on time. We have about 4.5 minutes left before we say our goodbyes. It would be lovely just to hear, I guess, a last sentence of a pearl of wisdom from each of you around really, once we get out of all of this, what might the future look like and what are we hoping for? I might just start up with Tom. A one-liner.
Sure.
A one-liner.
Oh, a one-liner. I would say.
You're getting lots of hearts and you're getting lots of. Everyone loves you, Tom.
I would say. You know what I would say? I would say be bold.
Yes.
Don't wait. This is our chance. Let's try some new things. Let's work together as a community to really solve some of these big challenges we see in front of us. And let's not wait to see what other folks are doing. I think we've got plenty of skill and talent sitting right here in this region that we can tap into, and we can do some pretty amazing things. So that would be my advice.
Thank you.
Let's
and
go.
Diane?
I think I'd probably say experiment. I think we've had such a crazy kind of experience this last 1.5 years, and we have so much open in the future. We just need to keep experimenting and see what works in terms of the future.
And thanks, Diane. And James?
I'm going to give a plug for the INDE Awards tonight. If anyone hasn't seen them, dial in and have a look, and you'll see when Rosemary and I started, challenging what the future workplace could be, we couldn't actually use the corporate designers. We had to go outside that into, domestic and just talented designers. That has completely turned on its head. The design, I've been lucky enough to be around from the beginning of the INDE Awards of being a judge. It's incredibly difficult to judge these things now. The whole standard. And I think that, we now kind of are waiting for the rest of the world to catch up, and the building industry, the property industry, and the prop tech industry. There's a great article, Harvard Business Review. Prop tech was second only to hunting and fishing in terms of innovation. So that suddenly has to catch up.
Thanks, James. And Mike?
Yes,
Your last 30 seconds.
Okay. There's a question in the chat from Natalie. We need to learn to live as a village, shared facilities. Will this be the model for the building for resilience in the community? It is the most fundamental contribution we can make to sustainability is to create the compact, walkable neighbourhood. We need to move away from the anomalous name, the central business district. We've got to create, vibrant downtowns that, people live, work, learn and play. And we've got to start to focus on, creating mini Melbournes, mini Sydneys, mini Brisbanes. We need to start to work the growth areas and learn from our forebears.
Thanks, Mike. And finally, Rosemary. The end comment. It's all on you.
Okay. I think the one thing that we need to learn to do ever better is to listen to the people, and from that, and really, you'll get the path into the future of your business as well as the places that shelter us, and do it with courage. So,
Love it. Everybody, we are now at the end of our session. I just want to thank our panellists today, Rosemary, James, Mike, Nyan, and Tom, and to our great audience who have sent in some great questions. Thank you. It's been a really informative experience exploring this subject. Have a great day. The next session is at 12:15 and is around manifesting culture, place, and identity in the Indo-Pacific. It sounds fantastic. So I hope everybody joins that session, and thank you for our session today.